All right, we are back with Kyle Trimble, a doctor of physical therapy, and he runs Banged Up Bills, and we are going to talk about the injury report from NFL Week 6. Kyle, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Max. Thanks for having me on again.
My pleasure, as always. Kyle does a phenomenal job. He's featured on several podcasts and YouTube channels to talk about NFL injuries, and he just brings something. We were just I was talking to Nick on he does the draft episode for us on Thursdays, and he was just talking to me, and he said that this is his favorite segment in the whole show, and I feel similarly. I mean, it's just I think it's something really cool and unique that we do, and I say unique. Obviously, you're on a few shows, but still, like compared to the vast majority of what's out there, I think it's a very cool thing. But look, we got quite a few. We've got 6 different divisions that we want to touch on today, so let's jump right into let's do the NFC West first.
All right. So we got several different injuries in that area. We got the Arizona Cardinals. They're dealing with wide receiver Marquise Brown, dealing with a left foot injury. It's a fracture. How I read it was to a bone. It would not require surgery, but he's going to be out for an indefinite timeline, according to head coach Cliff Kingsbury. But the timeline looks to be more 6 weeks there. Which is a pretty typical timeline for a broken bone to heal up. So it looks like he's going to go IR, but this was a far better outcome than what it looked to be, because what happened was he fell down and his left foot kind of just collapsed in on itself, which is a common mechanism you see with a Lisfranc injury. And there also could have been some other possibilities for that. So the fact that they said that this was only a small fracture in the bone that can heal up in 6 weeks, that's great for their outcomes. And with Brown being out for the next 6 weeks, they are getting DeAndre Hopkins back from suspension, which will be a nice addition. So you're going to get a 1-for-1 trade. And if they start improving their record and accelerating in the NFC West, getting Brown back when he's fully healthy could be a lethal tandem come December when he's fully healthy. So it's unfortunate, but injuries are part of football with that. Other injuries include the Rams, their offensive tackle, Joe Noteboom, did tear his Achilles, so he's out for the year. That's just an unfortunate injury they see there because of the eccentric contraction of the calf. You're trying to push against a big force. They're getting you pushing back. You're trying to contract the muscle, and something eventually gives, hence the Achilles tear. And then finally, the 49ers, they're dealing with cornerback Shavarius Ward with a groin injury, offensive tackle Mike McGlinchey with a calf, and they're still out Nick Bosa, who's dealing with a groin injury, and they face the Chiefs here next week in Week 7. So that's not going to be a good matchup for them, especially with the Chiefs coming off a loss to the Bills on Sunday. So the NFC West is getting banged up, but they're still going to be moving along, and at least the Cardinals are getting some relief with Hopkins coming back.
Yeah, I think the Cardinals is a really big one. It stinks that Brown is out. They did just trade for Robbie Anderson, so they still have the speed element to their game. And that kind of lets DeAndre Hopkins step right back in as the number 1 guy. And then maybe if he really is healthy in as many weeks as they're projecting, and they would have to be in position to make the playoffs anyway. But that would be a nice little receiving core to go from the first almost half the season with only Hollywood Brown. So we shall see. And then the Niners, man, they just can't catch a break. It's like everybody, they had such a good defense, and now one by one those guys are kind of dropping off. I mean, I hope they can overcome it, because they were a really fun team to watch when everybody was full bore out there. But I don't know, it's tough. And the Rams, just another one too. Like, the offensive line already wasn't playing well, so losing their left tackles, I don't even know. I don't even know what to say, man. It's
insult to injury. That's what it comes down to. Yeah. So,
yep.
But that's just how it goes in football. I mean, the injuries can be the great equalizer. Those teams that had Super Bowl aspirations don't even make the playoffs because they just beat up so much. I mean, we saw that with the Ravens last year. You've seen that in past seasons. Sometimes some teams can overcome it, but other teams sometimes it becomes too great. You lose too many guys, and it just doesn't happen. So, that and injuries and Father Time are undefeated, I guess, in a sense.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's why depth is so important in the NFL. I think, in college you have all this built-in depth, especially if you're a high-end program where you just have all these recruits. But it's really, 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 really challenging to build that depth. And I think there are a few teams who have done a really good job of that. And the Bills have been fairly fortunate with injuries overall, but they're kind of one of those teams that's sort of built to overcome it either way.
Absolutely. So we'll move to the NFC South next. We got the Buccaneers tight end Cameron Brate. He went out with a neck injury. I believe I saw he was but he was taken off on the board with part of the ambulance as part of precaution. Though they designated as a neck injury, he could still have a concussion. This would be his second one in 3 weeks if that did happen. And if he's had a concussion again, they're going to keep him out for probably at least a month, just because you got the heat still coming off from the Tua Tagovailoa issue, the new concussion protocols. And it's not saying that they have to be out longer because of that, but it's historically when you see a guy being out for concussion, maybe be out a week, and then when you're out for have another one, then you're looking at maybe being out a month just to make sure everything stays up. And then when you start having more and more, it just kind of keeps adding on to each other. So it's definitely not good to see that he's having so many injuries like that, but you got to keep the player healthy first and foremost and figure out all the other stuff with that. So give him a month off if he needs to, but it's just unfortunate when you see guys have an injury and then another injury similar to that later on, shortly thereafter.
Yeah. You know what it kind of feels like this season? It feels like every team that we talk about seems to be a recurring team. I mean, the 49ers, the Bucs. I mean, a lot of these teams, it's like we're talking about these same teams every single week, and it's not the same players, it's different guys. So they've got some of their wide receivers back, but now they lose Brate, so they're struggling to kind of hang in there right now too.
Absolutely. That's something I did notice when I was working for the game day. I would do these injury reports for fantasy and betting aspects, and that was what I did notice it too. It seemed like the same injuries kept on coming up. I talked about the Ravens a lot last year.
Mm-hmm.
It just seemed like it's like, okay, when's this going to end? I feel like I keep hitting on the same bets for the same people or the same teams, but just those injuries were having such a big impact on, the betting line. So it just, sometimes that's just how it is, but that's a great observation though. We are talking about the same teams again and again.
Yeah. So is that it for the NFC South, or do you have one more before we move on?
That was the only one, but it's just scary when you see a guy have two head injuries like that in 3 weeks here. So we will move over to the NFC North. Randall Cobb, the wide receiver, he did suffer a left high ankle strain. No, let me say that again. Left high ankle sprain when he got fallen on from behind, which is a classic mechanism. The foot go into eversion and dorsiflexion and get turned outward, injures the syndesmoses. It's unfortunate. You can't really do too much about some of those injuries. They didn't say they originally thought it was a fracture from what I saw, but then they said that it was a better outcome than a high ankle sprain. So he's looking at least the next 2 or 3 weeks out. I haven't seen whether they want to move him to injury reserve, but he's going to be out for a few weeks here. They're playing the Commanders, or no. They're playing the Commanders last week. I can't remember off the top of my head who they're playing here shortly, but they're going to need all the weapons they can get, especially with the Packers being, I think, 3-3 right now. They're being really underwhelming. So losing Cobb, even though he's an older veteran wide receiver, he does know the offense and has that connection with Aaron Rodgers. So it's unfortunate, but that's just once again part of football there.
Yeah, looks like they're playing the Commanders coming up here this week. They played the Jets last week. So
that's who it was there. Yes. Yeah. So, it is what it is. Sometimes things kind of blend together with the schedule. You're like, wait, did I see them play?
I know.
But, yeah.
I know.
So, but playing the Commanders could be a welcome reprieve, because we'll get into the Commanders' issues here in a second. But playing the Commanders could be a welcome bounce back game to move to 4-3 if the Packers can pull that off against an NFC opponent there. So heading into the NFC East there next, we got the Commanders. Carson Wentz is going to be out for at least the next 4 to 6 weeks with a broken ring finger on his throwing hand, and he's got surgery to help stabilize the fracture and ensure it to heal up faster. Now, the issue with the ring finger is, while there's not a ton of strength in there in terms of throwing a football, it's not like the pinky where you derive a lot of strength from your hand or even your thumb there. The ring finger isn't needed as much, but you still need that for gripping, which it's good that he can come back, but any wobble on the ball, any less accuracy, it's not going to be great, especially for somebody who, as talented as Carson Wentz is, he hasn't been able to put it together since like his rookie, maybe second season in the league when they won the Super Bowl with the Eagles. So they also don't want to rush him back anyway. And I did see something online about how if he plays in, I think 70% or less of the snaps, that the draft compensation changes for the Colts there. So the Commanders might not be in a rush to get him out there, especially if they're looking to change up the front office or even the coaching staff, because they've just been underwhelming over the past few years with Ron Rivera under the helm over in Washington. And then the other injury you got to note is Eagles' Lane Johnson, their offensive tackle. He's out with a concussion again. According to the Philadelphia Inquirer, this is his third concussion in 5 years, which isn't uncommon to see. But the article that that I referenced here, they're talking about the mental health with Lane Johnson. They talk about what player safety with that there. I do know there's been other players that have had more concussions. Jordan Reed, he was with the Washington 49ers, a few other teams there. He had, I think, up to 7 concussions. Mitch Morse with the Bills, he's had now, I believe, 5 concussions in his career. So you could have multiple concussions, but at some point, you got to wonder when the player does say, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. But I don't get the sense that he's going to retire or anything like that. But it's just interesting the tone of the article when I went to go do a little research for this.
Yeah, well, I think it's just we spent a lot of time talking about concussions. They kind of faded out of the mainstream, group thought for a little while. The NFL have been doing so much to try and make it look like they are really making that an effort. And now, after the Tua Tagovailoa situation, which we'll talk about as soon as we talk about the AFC East here in a minute, it's all back to the forefront. And I was just talking with Kyron. Generally speaking, like the traditional thought is 3 concussions, 3 serious concussions, and you should probably call your football career quits from a personal well-being standpoint. So, I don't know if Lane Johnson is going to do that. I think when I hear numbers like 5 or even 7, it's like it just makes my jaw clench. You know what I mean? It's just like that. That's brutal for one body to take. So I understand the tone of the Philadelphia Inquirer. I really do, because he's kind of getting to the point where you got to question whether it's worth it or not.
Yep. And you got to wonder how many are undiagnosed with subconcussive hits. And then we see those older players. I think of Darryl Talley, being a Bills fan. He had, I don't know how many officially diagnosed concussions he had, but he's doing okay now. But he's not all mentally there at times. He doesn't have good days. And then even some of his teammates, I remember Thurman Thomas has talked about how he has sometimes lapses in memory. Troy Aikman, he kind of looks like he's stone faced at times on broadcast, and he doesn't have recollections from the Super Bowl. So a lot of these guys that played through those serious injuries, concussions, we're learning more about how it's more of a serious injury than it used to be. But it's really scary when you see, like, okay, how many concussions do those guys really have and go out and play in the same game? Versus we're seeing now 3 and 5 years, and hey, is that too much for a guy? It's good that the tone has changed in that way, but it's just scary when you do see, hey, this is what happened 30 years ago and how those guys are doing now. You obviously have to take a different approach, factoring when you're always trumpeting player safety.
Yeah, I do agree, and we'll talk just a little bit more about it when we get to Tua as well. All right, so that should do it for the NFC. Do you want to jump right into the AFC East, or did I jump over someone?
No. I think I'm hitting on all the people that I want to hit on that I see that are coming out with their injuries. We're going to move to we'll do the Bills first, and then we'll tie it back around to the Dolphins, because we'll talk about Tua a little bit more there. So the Bills, they're getting healthier. They beat the Chiefs 24-20. The only injury that was notable was their offensive tackle Spencer Brown dealing with a right lateral ankle injury. They do have a well-timed bye next week, so he might be able to play against the Packers in Week 8, but that remains to be seen, depending on the severity. But I also do want to highlight Jordan Poyer, their safety, All-Pro last year. He had to drive to the game. Now, he didn't physically drive. They had a Mercedes Sprint van drive him from Orchard Park, New York, all the way out to Arrowhead, because he had a lung contusion from a cracked rib against the Baltimore Ravens in Week 4. That was basically the game-changing interception that led to them winning. So he had that lung contusion, did not play last week. And usually after a lung contusion for a suspected pneumothorax, they advise not to fly for at least 2 to 3 weeks after that injury. So big shout out to Jordan Poyer for driving out to the game, even though he could have said, I'll stay at home, but they understood what that meant to that. And he had to drive all the way back, and then he'll be cleared to fly in the next week or two here. But they won't be traveling for a few weeks now, though. But certainly some big news coming out of Kansas City, especially after that story broke after the game.
Crazy. Just crazy. And he was impactful in that game, too. Absolute monster. He's
been looking for a new contract, and it's like the things that guys doing, and he's already had a foot injury. Earlier this season, he's had a left hyperextension of his elbow early in training camp. The guy is battling through injuries. He's doing everything he can to be ready to play. Pay the man. So find some way to pay the man because he's deserving it there. So
I remember we were talking about that back when you first came on to preview the Bills this season.
Yes, yeah. So it's just these guys are playing. They got one shot at getting paid. Pay the guy somehow. He's been too valuable, especially with Micah Hyde being out with his own injury there.
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely.
We'll move into the Dolphins here next. We got Jalen Waddle. He's dealing with a left shoulder injury. There's a chance that it could be an AC joint sprain because he fell and kind of hit with his elbow first, which kind of jams the head of the humerus up and in, which can cause a AC joint sprain. My buddy, Dr. David Chow, had suggested that might be a shoulder subluxation, which is certainly a possibility. That's basically a partial dislocation of the shoulder, and it kind of pops right back in there, whereas a dislocation is where the joint stays out of the socket there. So we have to see more information regarding Waddle. He might struggle to get up over top. There might be more laxity in the joint if there is a tearing of the labrum, because that does sometimes happen with shoulder subluxation, where the shoulder pops out part of the way, tears a small part of the labrum, and then you don't have that full support in there anymore. So we'll see. Sometimes the subluxation itself doesn't stop a guy from playing, but if you have repeated subluxations or it does lead to dislocation, sometimes then guys are out for a little bit as they try to get the rotator cuff strengthened up to help give it support around the area for the lack of the support in the labrum.
Gotcha. And having him out there would be a big deal if he can play, because we are about to see Tua Tagovailoa back on a football field. Apparently, he's practicing to potentially be the starter behind a questionable offensive line. So they're going to have to get the ball out quick. I think, to me, this it reeks of desperation, and it's scary to watch. I was talking to Kyron yesterday, and it's just like, I don't even want to watch this game. I'm gonna, because it's prime time, but I would almost rather just not watch it and then go back and watch it when I know nothing awful happens. You know what I mean? I just don't want to. I don't want to see that happen.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. He did pass the concussion protocol. They ever ruled him out prior to week 6, which was the right method. And by then he'll be out, I think 3-4 weeks, give or take, depending on how you look at the calendar. Because he injured in week 4, because that was the first game, and then he'll be returning week 7, which is 3 weeks, which isn't uncommon. But there's been so much heat around the injury, and then how they change things. You don't want to hold somebody out that's healthy. Sometimes you need to protect the player from their own self in order to make sure that they can, the player safety there. But you also can't say, hey, if you've passed all the stuff we need you to do, we won't let you play, though. I think that's a big problem with the NFL Players Association. So I think you let him back out there and kind of see where the cards, lie. But like you said, with the offensive line position, Teron Armstead dealt with a toe injury since week 1. He wasn't able to play last week. I think his injury is more severe than what they're letting on. Greg Little isn't good. And then Austin Jackson might be coming back, and he's been underwhelming. And then they just don't have a great offensive line right now. So you're right. They're going to have to get the ball out quickly and make sure that they can move that ball around very well. And, of course, Skylar Thompson's out with a thumb injury, I saw, too. Teddy Bridgewater came back from his own concussion protocol, which is another discussion we had last week. It's not a good situation in Miami. As I'm talking myself through that, there is a sense of desperation because they know what they have on the roster. They can compete for playoffs. It's kind of scary when you see them. It kind of does have some desperation. It's kind of sad, but that's the business of football too, though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I understand the idea that the Players Association would be upset about holding guys out, even though they're technically cleared. But I feel like this is kind of, it has some mitigating circumstances around it. You know what I mean? I feel like it might be tough for the Players Association to come down hard on the Dolphins when they're already coming down on them hard for putting him back out there too quickly. You know what I mean? Like, I think on some level you're going to have to pick a side, at least in that one situation. I feel like after seeing his body seized up on the field, it's just like, just give it a little extra time,
Yeah. But when there's millions of dollars involved, sometimes that's certainly, there's ethics involved with that, but that's not our place to decide that. But still, it is certainly worth a conversation.
100%.
Yeah. So then, wrapping up with the divisions, we get the Russell Wilson dealing with a hamstring injury suffered in the Monday night game against the Chargers. The Broncos have not been playing well, and neither is Russell Wilson. He's dealing with the shoulder injury that required a PRP injection due to the latissimus dorsi strain. He now has this hamstring injury that he's been working through. I'm not sure which side it's on, but that could affect his throwing because that's the plant leg. If that is the side that that's been affected, it's certainly going to affect his scrambling. And with how poorly they've been playing, I mean, I don't think they even put up 20 points at all this year. I think it's all been low scoring affairs, right?
I would have to check exactly what their record is, but they haven't played well, and they've been close in a couple, nothing that you would call a shootout, and then they've been just blown out in a couple too. I could just take a quick here about their specific point totals, but keep going.
Yeah, I mean, it's just he hasn't been playing well. I mean, I know there's other dynamics. Nathaniel Hackett hasn't been the best coach. He's starting to get better with it, but they've just been really underwhelming after all that talk in the preseason about the AFC West beating up on each other, and this could be the best division of football. I mean, Chargers haven't been great. Broncos haven't been great. The Chiefs look human now after getting beat by the Bills, and then the Raiders are just god awful this year, even though being close in a lot of games there. So,
yeah. Well, they did clear 20 points once against the Raiders. They scored 23 points. It was still a loss, but they have managed to clear that bar.
Yeah, but they've certainly been underwhelming there. But it is what it is there. So, and then just wrapping up a few other guys that are looking to return soon. We already mentioned Tua. He's going to return in Week 7. Dak Prescott of the Cowboys quarterback is looking to return here very soon. I know Jerry Jones is always out there playing doctor. They're always just looking to play through there. Cooper Rush has played well in his absence, but I think I did see he didn't have a good game the other day. So Dak is getting close to return. It might just come down to can he grip the football and put a good spiral on it and get the accuracy down properly. But he's been shown to be a pretty quick healer. And then the Bills, Tre Davis White, he's expected to return in Week 8 against Green Bay after tearing his ACL on Thanksgiving last year. I thought he would come back a little bit quicker than that, but they've been really slow playing things, knowing that the Bills have been playing so well in his absence. And if you can get him back for that second half of the season, it's going to be better than trying to get him playing through hamstring or groin or even quad injury, try and come back from an ACL too quickly. So those are a few players looking to come back soon, and they'll be welcome additions to their respective teams.
Yeah, well, for sure. I'm curious to see what Tre Davis White looks like, and I think, you never know who's going to get hurt between now and then, but adding a player like that who maybe get fully back in the swing of things by the time the playoffs roll around just makes him that much more dangerous. As far as Dak goes, man, it fits the time. It fits a reasonable timeline, but it also on the conspiracy theorist little side of me, it is rather coincidental that the exact week that Cooper Rush has a bad game and they lose, Dak's expected to play next week, and that news came out literally like the day after the game. So, I mean, maybe there's a little something there. And then I think I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
For Russ Wilson, he did look a little bit better in that first quarter. So when you're talking about the strain that he has in his latissimus dorsi, I believe you said it was.
Yes.
So that's what traditionally is called your lat, right? Like that's basically what's down underneath. For people watching on YouTube, I'm like absentmindedly like showing you, I guess. But Do you think that there would have been pain that was lesser early in the game, and he was just it flared up, it became aggravated, or do you think he just played through the pain and eventually got to be too much? Do you think that really doesn't have anything to do with exactly the difference between the early and late game play? Because it did seem like there was a difference in how effective he was.
That's definitely a multifactorial answer. I did see that his fourth quarter statistics were god awful. That could have been due to the hamstring, the throwing motion for the latissimus dorsi, and just all the musculature up in the arm responsible for throwing. He could have been fine, and then as it went on, more fatigue set in, and he wouldn't necessarily get a pain shot in that area, but things could have just been wearing down. I mean, the muscle's already injured in that area, and so to ask him to do throwing over time, the muscle's going to get progressively weaker, especially when there's injury involved. So that could be with that. If you know that going in, you try to get the offense going quickly. Get a bunch of points on the board. Know that you might peter off in the second half, but
I'm sure they would have liked to do that.
Yeah, but they can't. We know that they can't do that. So no, that's a good question. I don't have a great answer for that because I think there's more to it than just that. But it very well could have been that he was feeling good, and then as the game wore on, he started feeling the pain and just the restrictions associated with that injury.
Okay, gotcha. All right, and anything else that you wanted to throw in there before we say goodbye for this week?
No, I think that's it there. I think we covered all the major injuries. I'm sure there's always a few that I'm missing, but I try to hit the bigger ones, the division leaders and, the ones that show up on, the Twitter and ESPN and things like that.
For sure. All right, Kyle, thank you so much again. And please let everybody know where they can find all of your work, especially some of your Bills related content between now and next week.
All right. So you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit at banged-up-bills. You can find my work over at banged-up-bills.com. Cover One, Buffalo Rumblings. You can find my weekly podcast segments, obviously, here on Locked On Bills on Fridays, and then Buffalo Late Night on Monday nights. So everywhere and anywhere that you want to find Bills and NFL injury information.
All right, beautiful. We will see you next week.